Hey guys, and welcome to the Pacing Racing Podcast, the Canadian Triathlon podcast made in mind for the age group triathletes. So I'm really excited to say that today's episode, I get to interview one of my inspirations in the sport, and is the Ironman historian himself, Bob Babbitt. So if you were on social media anytime in October and follow anything to do with triathlon, then I'm sure you came across the amazing Breakfast with Bob video interviews that were recorded down at the Ironman World Championships. Bob has an incredible way of connecting with all the pro triathletes, and super inspiring to me to watch, seeing as I'm following in similar footsteps, interviewing triathletes and trying to find inspiration and motivation through asking the right questions. Now, Bob's love for triathlon dates all the way back to the third ever Ironman triathlon, which he goes into detail talking about in this episode, and it's a must-hear story, and it's amazing to see how much triathlon has truly evolved over the years. So most of you may already know, on the side of Breakfast with Bob video interviews, he's been doing a radio and podcast program through Babbittville dating back to 1990. So if there's any true Ironman interviewer, then this is the guy, and I'm absolutely humbled today to get to be the one to interview him. Now, in this episode, you also hear about his legacy, what he finds so passionate and exciting about triathlon that he wants to share with the world, and we go over some funny stories, motivational stories, and even some motivational key takeaways that we can all learn from and incorporate into our triathlon training as well as our daily lives. It's an excellent podcast today, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the episode. Now let's cue the music. Today's show is brought to you by two sponsors. The first one is Brown Sports Bike Shop located in Toronto, Ontario. So I've always wanted to partner up alongside a local bike shop, but I was reluctant to commit because I never found a bike shop that encompassed everything I wanted in a shop until I met JP from Brown Sports. When you want to help represent a bike shop, you want to know you can be absolutely sure you can refer your friends and family and listeners to them and know they're being taken care of in the best hands and getting the best prices. The team at Brown Sports are super knowledgeable when it comes to proper bike selection and bike fitting. In fact, JP is a Retool and IBFI Level 2 certified fitter and will go above and beyond helping you select the right bike for you and go to great lengths in making sure you leave the best bike fit possible. And they have a huge selection of bikes, including an incredible lineup from Quintana Roo bikes, and they're also the only company in Canada to offer up the 51 Speed Shop products. So it's really an all-in-one shop. So it's not just a bike shop, though. They also have a ton of great nutritional products, swim gear, and running gear. So if you're needing to add something to your triathlon repertoire, then there's a good chance they have it. And I'm currently working with JP now to get my bike fit dialed in, as last season I realized I was losing some valuable wattage and coming off the bike way more fatigued than I had to be because my positioning was way off. So I'll be doing a video of the fitting process when it's all done. So if you want to see that, then be sure to sign up to the Pacing Racing YouTube channel to be first notified when that comes out. And alongside carrying some of the best triathlon and road bike selections, Brown Sports also has a demo room for all the best indoor bike trainers, including the TAC series, the Wahoo series, and even the latest 4i Flight trainer. So if you're in the market for a new bike trainer, then they are also the experts in that area, and they'll help you set up the proper trainer and get you a good price. So if you want to go check them out in person, you can find them at 2447 Bloor Street West in Toronto at the Jane and Bloor intersection, or of course, you can also check them out and see their full inventory and list of services online at brownsports.com. And lastly, you can follow them on Instagram or Facebook by searching Brown Sports. The second sponsor of today's show is Echelon Wheels, which is a wheel manufacturer based right here out of Ontario, Canada. And I'm beyond happy to find a wheel company like Echelon for so many reasons. As we mentioned, this being a Canadian-based podcast, I love to have partnerships with other Canadian brands, and who better than a wheel company that offers top-quality designs and materials for a wheel set at a fraction of the cost compared to the other brands in the market. And to put this into perspective, the Echelon full disc is going for around $14.99 Canadian, whereas some other brands in the market are selling their full discs for upwards of $3,300 US. And of course, every wheel set is different, but as an age grouper, we all know that the sport is super expensive. So it's nice knowing there are brands out there like Echelon. They're just able to keep the cost down for us as much as possible. So the neat thing about Echelon is that they're active cyclists who run the company. So you know they're not just making their products, they're actually using them for their passion. And if you look at their products, they carry wheel selections from U profile, V profile, and offer depth ranges from 38 millimeters all the way up to the full disc. So if you're curious about my bike setup, I'm currently running with a 60 millimeter Echelon wheel in the front and an 88 millimeter Echelon wheel in the rear with DT Swiss hubs. And recently I created an aero testing video alongside William, the co-founder of Echelon Wheels, where we tested 3 different Echelon wheel sets across 2 days of outdoor testing at different set wattages to see what wheels are best suited in certain course conditions. So if you guys want to check that out, you can head to Pacing Racing on YouTube. Echelon isn't only a partner of the Pace Racing podcast, but they're also huge supporters of Team LPC, which is the team I'm training with this year as I build up to 2020 Challenge Roth. And for a limited time, they've been super, super awesome and offer up a discount code to the Pacing Racing listeners. So if you want to look at getting yourself a wheel set, then head to echelonwheels.ca and use promo code Pacing and Racing. And I also recommend checking them out on Instagram or Facebook by searching at Echelon Wheels. And again, Echelon is spelled ECHELON. All right, so Bob, welcome to Breakfast with Steven. No, I'm totally kidding. Welcome to the Pace Racing podcast, man. How are you doing?
I'm great, Steven. Thanks so much for the time.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks so much for coming on today. I mean, usually you're the one doing the interview, so I'm sure this must be a little bit of a change, eh?
Hey, yeah, a little different, but always enjoy talking to people who share the same passion for our sport.
Yeah, awesome. That's just it. There's so much I'd like to chat about with you today, but before we dive into all of it, let's start back at the beginning. And when did you first get your taste of triathlon, and what made you get into the endurance sports?
Well, I had moved out from Chicago to San Diego in 1978, and in 78, the triathlon had actually started in San Diego in 1974. So they had these events over at a place called Fiesta Island. First triathlon was held there in September 25th, 1974. And they had really the triathlons were part of San Diego Track Club, and they weren't really their own event, or it wasn't really considered a sport. It was just a workout for the runners. And so every once in a while they would do these races out there where sometimes we would swim first, bike, run, but usually you'd start with a 10K run and then a 20 mile or so bike, and then you'd swim at the end, and you'd swim between these little islands, and you'd swim to the island, run around, and then swim across a little channel. And it was really fun. And that's really what it was all about at the beginning. Nobody really thought of it as its own standalone sport. And then that same year, 78, was when the Ironman started. And then we read about the Ironman in 1979 and what was then the Bible of Sport, which is a magazine called Sports Illustrated. And that came out in 79 with an 8-page article on an event in Hawaii. And the winner was a guy named Tom Warren, who lived here in San Diego. And it's like 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike ride, 26.2 mile run. And there's only 15 people who started the race, actually, in both 78 and 79. And 12 finished, and Tom won it. And the fact they did an 8-page article on an event with only 15 people in it was pretty surprising. But my roommate at the time, a guy named Ned Overend, who went on to become world mountain bike champion, but he was a mechanic at San Diego Suzuki. I was a school team, run a PE program. We met rock climbing in Mexico. We read this article, and I was like, this sounds really cool. It'd be pretty fun to go do. But it's not like you go online and find out about it.
Right.
So we had to track down Tom Warren, who won the event, to tell us, what do you do? How do you sign up? How do you train? And he was a little bit of an eccentric type of guy. And we tracked him down, and he basically, he had this motor home that he had down by the beach, and he told us to meet him at his office. And we get down there, and there's a motorhome with a bike on the back and a paddleboard on top and running shoes tied around the side view mirror. And we're like, this doesn't look like an office. And then he took us to the bar next door. And as he explained to us about the training he did for this Ironman thing, every so often he'd make a mark on his arm with his magic marker. And we're like, again, he's our mentor. He's telling us how we're going to do this crazy event. And we're like, Mr. Warren, sir, what's the deal with the magic marker? And he's like, well, I have a little bit of a drinking problem. And every time I have a drink, I make a mark on my arm. When I get to my sleeve, I go home. We're like, okay. So that led to us going to his house, and he had a sauna in his house where he had his bike mounted, and he would do 5 hours a day in the sauna. And that was that was a big part of his heat training for Ironman was being in the sauna. And then we went out to a police auction to buy bikes to go do this thing. We found out you send your $25 into to this address in Hawaii to sign up for the event. And I was actually race number 3, not because I was seated, but my $25 was the third check they got. So I was now race number 3 in the race. But we got it. My bike was a $75. The whole back end had been charred in a fire, and had the flat proof tires on there because I didn't know how to change tires, and the fuzzy raccoon seat cover, and foam grips on the handlebars, and pannier, sleeping bag, and tent on the bike because I thought you swam 2.4, rode 56, camped out, and then rode back the next day and ran the marathon. I had no idea that you do the whole thing in one day. And so we were, and Ned and I go over to Hawaii, and there was big storms on the island. And so they're going to do the Waikiki Rough Water Swim and a Round Oahu bike ride and the Honolulu Marathon back to back to back. And Ned and I go to we go to this pre-race meeting, and the waves are breaking 10 feet up on the wall of the hotel. And we're all of our swimming was in a 120 length to the mile pool. We knew we were going to die. And we basically looked at each other. I was like, well, it's been a nice life. We're going to be dead tomorrow because there's no way we're going to get through that surf. And by this time, because of the article in Sports Illustrated, the event had grown from 12 people in 12 finishers in 1979 and 15 starters to 108 starters in 1980. So,
Wow.
Hey, listen, the event had gone 10 times, right? So we go into this meeting where their race director is like, listen, we've got these big storms to surf on the island here, but we also got ABC Wide World of Sports wants to cover our event tomorrow. But if we try to run it tomorrow, there's no way we're going to get the safety boats out, and we'll have to postpone it till Sunday. And if that happens, we're going to lose ABC Wide World of Sports because they have to shoot cliff diving on Sunday. So I'm moving the swim from the Waikiki Rough Water Swim to the Ala Moana Channel. If they hadn't moved the swim, we'd still be out there. we would have died. There's no question about it. So they moved the swim to this Ala Moana Channel, and it was 4 lengths in this calm waters of the Ala Moana Channel. And Ned and I ended up getting out of the water, and you had to have your own support crew back then. No roads were blocked off. There's no aid stations. We had to get off our bikes, and during the run, you got weighed a number of times. They had scales. If you lost 5% of your body weight, they'd pull you out of the race.
Crazy.
So we get into the swim and finish get out of the water, which I was excited about. I had a radio mounted on the top of my handlebars, and I'm listening to a Rolling Stones concert from Maui on my little Radio Shack radio as I'm riding through Waikiki and thinking this is the coolest thing in my life. And my crew was on the side of the road about mile 25, and I'm like, oh my God, this is like Tour de France. I'm going to get a handoff of food. This will be awesome. And it was a brown bag with a Big Mac, fries, and a Coke. At mile 90, got a root beer snow cone, which was awesome. And then at the end of the bike, I come riding in, and I hear this music, and I see this boom box. My crew has a full-on bamboo mat laid out. And they're like, hey, how about a massage? I'm like, oh, that sounds great. So I got a 45-minute massage between a bike and a run, and then head off on the run. And I'm running along, and what do you eat? We didn't know what nutrition for during a race, so I knew you needed carbs. So I had Hawaiian sweet bread, and we had Gatorade. And I get on the scale when we first start the run, and then about mile 4, we get on the scale again, and I've been waddling through Waikiki with eating Hawaiian sweet bread and drinking Gatorade. And I still remember the guy like on the walkie-talkie going, can you give me that again? This guy's gained 4 pounds. You can't gain weight with this thing. And then, meanwhile, Ned, his girlfriend at the time, now his wife, she lost him during the early part of the bike ride. And when she caught him, he was drinking out of a sprinkler on the side of the road at mile 90. And it was the first time he saw her all day. And now, now I'm running up Diamond Head. And I'm thinking, this is like mile 22, 23. I'm riding up Diamond Head, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to finish this thing. My crew is right behind me in their little Fiat convertible with their lights on me. It's pitch black out. I've been out there over 14 hours. And I'm thinking there's going to be bands at the finish. There's going to be all sorts of excitement. This is a pretty cool achievement. I didn't think I could do this in one day. And I didn't even use my pannier, my sleeping bag and tent. So now I'm running down into Kapolani Park, which is a finish, and there's a white line across the road. There's a light above my head, and I sort of slow down, and I hear this voice in the dark. It's like, hey, you. I'm like, yeah. You in the race? Yeah. You're done. That was it. There was nobody. There was one guy doing one-arm push-ups in the park, and that was it. But when I finished and walked away from there, I felt like I had changed my life. I felt like I had found this cool event that really was something that I didn't think I could do, and it changed my perception of me. And that led to, when I left that island, I went home, and a guy had a local magazine in San Diego called Running News, and through basically just badgering him every day, it became Running and Triathlon News, based on the fact that 108 of us had done this stupid event in Hawaii. And that led to leaving teaching and starting Competitor Magazine, because I believed in endurance sports. And Competitor Magazine ended up becoming 500,000 circulation, 11 editions around the country, and eventually Competitor Magazine, which started in 200 square feet under 20,000 pounds of bike racks with $200 a month in rent. Eventually, we ended up becoming the Competitor Group with with 34 rock and roll marathons under our umbrella, and the Muddy Buddy series, which I started, 18 events and 40,000 participants, plus Competitor Magazine, Velo News Magazine, Triathlete Magazine. So watching our whole world of endurance from 1980 to when we sold for the first time in 2008, just watching and being part of that growth was pretty special.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's spectacular how it all unfolded, right? And it just came from that one race, just the third Ironman essentially ever. And what unfolded after that is it's unbelievable. So what I find completely fascinating is today, still myself, as we think about Ironman racing, there's so much strategy behind the training building up to a race, the nutrition on course and everything like that, right? And you had nothing to follow essentially. Like you didn't know you had to bring your sleeping bag or eating Big Macs, right? Like it's amazing to kind of hear that, and pioneers of the Ironman essentially, and how it all unfolded. So that's super cool. And I mean, at what point, so you were one of the co-founders of Competitor Magazine. Now,
yep.
What made you want to go that avenue? Because now, of course, you're really well known for being a historian of the series and doing interviews with athletes and just sharing the stories of motivation of endurance sports, right? So kind of what made you want to go down that path?
Yeah, it's funny because when I came back from doing that Ironman event, I immediately, because I was teaching, I'm running a PE program, I started doing these events at the school for the kids that I was running a PE program for, and I called them Iron Kids. These are Iron Kids events. I went down to Mexico and I bought these incredible Hulk ceramic banks, right, that you put your coins in, and those were my trophies for this Iron Kids triathlon. So the kids would do these little swim, obstacle course, run events, and they would be called Iron Kids. And I called up this guy, Mike Plant, who had Running News, which became eventually Running and Triathlon News, and said, Mike, I think these are pretty fun. You may want to come and cover it. And he goes, I don't have time to get out there. Why don't you write it up? And I wrote it up, and just a little tongue-in-cheek about like the Ironman with the helicopter overhead and sort of making up a lot of things. And Mike really liked it. And he says, why don't you keep writing for me? And that led to me creating the Old Fart of the Month, the Running Wino, the Reverend Campagnola Minister of Triathlism, and just really weird, different type of characters. And I guess they touched a nerve because back then people couldn't write letters by going online. You had to sit at a desk and write something on paper and put a stamp on it and mail it. And all of a sudden we started getting all these letters, and they were either, this guy cracks me up, or I can't believe you're calling somebody an Old Fart of the Month. It was whatever it was. What Mike told me, and that stayed with me till this day, was you can't do anything about vanilla. If people don't react to what you're doing and they don't care, you're not going to know. If they spend the time to sit at a desk and write a letter because they like what you did or hated what you did, that shows passion. That shows they care. That's what you want. You want to encourage passion. And so that's what we always tried to do. I always wanted, so then I left teaching to go work for Mike and became LA editor of Running and Triathlon News. And we drive to LA every weekend and cover these races. And I convinced the art teacher, Lois Schwartz, to leave this teaching and become the photographer. And she captured the Iron War shot, became one of the best photographers in the history of triathlon and running. And we loved what we were doing. And so when Running and Triathlon News went out of business in April of '87, I wanted to continue what we were doing. And I went and met with a couple of magazine publishers here in California that had, one magazine was Southwest Cycling, one was California Bicycling. And I said to both of them, if we did a magazine combining running, triathlon, and cycling, I think it could be really successful. And both of them said the same thing. This is 87. They said, triathlon is a fad. It'll be gone in 5 years. We'll never put a skinny runner on the cover of a magazine, and all we care about is cycling. So came home from that pretty depressed and told Lois that, these guys weren't going to partner with us. And some friends of ours called us into a meeting and gave us a check for $17,000 and said, go start your own magazine. So that was like April of 87. In June of 87, we came out with the first edition of Competitor Magazine. And it was, a combination of running and triathlon and cycling. And I think we touched a nerve, because at that point, it was, Triathlete Magazine and Triathlon Magazine started in 83, and this is 4 years later, but nobody was doing something. I looked at it as, if you're a triathlete, you're swimming, cycling, and running. So you care about all those things. And also through the years, anything endurance is going to be a part of Competitor Magazine. When obstacle racing first started, when the adventure racing first started, when Grand Final, we were there. We were an investor in the first rock and roll marathon. I believed in Tim Murphy's vision of what he wanted to achieve. He said running should be more fun. And if we put bands every mile, this could be really exciting. And his first rock and roll marathon, which was the first brand new marathon in the U.S. forever, had 20,000 people for a first time event, which was huge.
Yeah.
It changed the whole face of running. And we put together a group of, my whole mentality was that the first rock and roll, that Elvis should lead the first rock and roll. So I convinced Kenny Souza, who you probably remember the name, he was a top 2 athlete at the time. I was like, Kenny, I'm going to get you an Elvis outfit, and I want you to go off the front with all the Kenyan guys and lead the first rock and roll. And the race director was all against it. He was like, if he trips our lead runners, you and Kenny will be banned from anything to do with rock and roll forever. And so I said, Kenny, don't worry about it. Just go off the front. So Kenny goes off the front as Elvis, and that photo touched a nerve. That became the signature of that event for the next 5 years. It was like, yeah, we're serious. We got the best runners in the world, but wear a costume. Nothing wrong with Elvis being out here at the first ever rock and roll leading the race. And it sort of changed the whole face of running, because running at that point was 80% guys and 20% women. And over time, because of the charity component and because women were discovering how much fun marathons and half marathons were, that race series became 60 to 65% women. It changed the face of running. It changed expos. It changed endurance sports. So watching all that happen has been pretty cool.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Like, just to see how the landscape changed over those years, right? It's absolutely incredible to realize that all happened. And, things like the magazines, how crucial that was in getting it out, because like you mentioned earlier, like, we didn't have the internet back then, right? Like, it wasn't just going online and looking stuff up. Like, that was the resource. So I always find that's really fascinating. Yeah.
And it was fun too, is I found that my mentality with the magazine was this, that people, you don't write the magazine for Dave Scott, Mark Allen, Paul Nibby Fraser, but the people who are reading want to know more about these folks. Who are they? What makes them special? Is there something about what they do that I can use to help me in my daily life? Because I always felt that people have this sense that our elite athletes, if it's running, triathlon, or cycling, that they're sort of born and then somebody identifies them to be a world-class triathlete, and then they go to world-class triathlete school, and next thing you know, they're winning the Ironman. And that's one of the things I try to get across in our interviews, that these folks were just like us. They played other sports, and Dave Scott, for example, he was a swim coach. And he was a water polo player. And when he played water polo, he was very good, but he wasn't going to make the U.S. team. He wasn't going to be one of the very best. And it was frustrating for him because he knew he trained harder than everybody else. Well, then this Ironman thing comes along, which was perfect for someone who trained their ass off every day. And Dave Scott goes there the first time in 1980 and takes nearly 2 hours off of Tom Warren's time. And it's like a light bulb goes on. Oh, my God, this is my sport. Same thing. Scott Tinley was going to be a paramedic. Mark Allen wanted to go to medical school. Scott Molina was flipping burgers at a Kmart up in Northern California before they found these sports. And the next thing you know, they're making a living at it, which they appreciate. Right there, it's not like they were given something; they earned something, and they grew up with a sport. And the next thing you know, they're the best ever. Right? If you look at what Mark Allen and Dave Scott did in 1989, and you think about that being 30 years ago, the swim time it basically is comparable to what those guys do today. And the fact that they ran 240 and 241, that was faster than Jan Frodeno ran this year. And really the big difference, if you look at today and back then, is the bike is faster. But those guys were on the equipment they were riding, and the fact that transition was included in your run split, you look at what those guys did back then, and you realize how special a time it was and how amazing those guys were as athletes.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's so amazing to look back at that. And I'm excited to see that still today, things like the Iron War, it's still so highly talked about, right? Because those are big integral parts of the sport, of the endurance sport and the history behind it. So it's amazing that those guys are still getting recognized today. And I mean, as we look at more of the recent years here, like a perfect example this year, at both the 70.3 Worlds and the Ironman World Championships, you were at them both recording Breakfast with Bob interviews. Now, what was it like this year for you? Because both these races had incredible stories, like Gustav taking the 70.3 title, and you had Jan coming in confident as ever and putting one of the best performances that we've seen in quite a long time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what was fascinating about the 70.3 Worlds, and I think what people love about it, is here you've got Ironman champions like Patrick Lange and Sebastian Kienle. You've got 70.3 specialists, and then you got Alistair Brownlee and Javier Gomez and and Gustav and Patrick Nielsen. You got all these guys who are in a position of really. A lot of times these guys hadn't raced each other. That's what's so fun about the 70.3 Worlds. You've got Olympic distance guys they've raced Brownlee and Gomez, but they've never raced Patrick Lange or Sebastian Kienle or Bart Arnott, and that's pretty fun. And then on the women's side with Lucy, I'm still wondering what would have happened if you didn't have that 5-minute penalty for Lucy. Mm-hmm. Daniela Reef, who and Holly Lawrence coming back from injury. There was so many great storylines there, so many fun storylines. And then Kona, it's funny, you see back in the day when Craig Alexander won 2 years in a row, and when he won in 08 and 09, then what happened in 2010, Chris McCormick got a bunch of the German athletes and a bunch of the other top cyclists, and they attacked Crowe between Quai High, Javi, and back to Quai High, and got 8 minutes on the guy. And so then he finished fourth that year and came back to win the following year. Well, Jan Frodeno wins 2 years in a row. And then the third year, he got attacked on the bike by Lionel Sanders and by Cam Wurf and by Sebastian Kienle, and they put time on him. And I think by that effort, he sort of strained his back and wasn't a factor. The following year, he didn't even get to the starting line because he ran a 1:06 half marathon at 70.3 Worlds, which is, when you look at what he did that day with a 1:06, and you look at Alistair with a 1:07, and then you go from there to Gomez with a 1:08. So those guys, that being a month before Kona, that race took, Jan didn't get to the starting line. Gomez didn't have the race he wanted for his first Kona. And Alistair was pretty worthless the rest of the season. That race, hard to put two world-class performances back to back, which is why you didn't see Jan going to 70.3 Worlds this year, right? It's really, I think people are going to have second thoughts about, are they going to go to 70.3 Worlds or are they going to go to Kona? Now, this year is going to be interesting because Brownlee and Gomez are in a unique position for 2020 where they could go to the Olympics, then go to Kona, and then go to 70.3 Worlds at the end of November. That could be pretty cool.
That would be quite the season for them. Actually, I love when it comes up to the Olympics every now and then, because triathlon just gets that much more exciting, right? Like we get to see some of these star athletes really shine light. And I know even recently we just had Cam Wurf, who's going to be doing, I think this weekend, it's his first ITU style of racing. So, I mean, it's always exciting to kind of see athletes jump around the distances and just show face at more events around the world. So that's actually really cool. And I look forward to a really busy 2020 season ahead. Now, when we talk about Kona here, was there a year in Kona in particular that stands out to you over the years as being one of those most game-changing or memorable or shocking races that pops up in your mind that will go down in history? I know, like we said, it's highly spoken of, the Iron War, but is there another year like that really changed the shape of the sport?
Well, there's been a number of them. I mean, my favorites are always the ones where you have somebody shows up who you have no idea who it is, and they just sort of dominate. So in 96, this guy, Luc van Lierde, comes over from Belgium, and back then you didn't have to qualify to get the Kona. You were invited. So he was invited to come over. He'd never run a marathon, never done an Ironman. That was his first Ironman. And all he did was break the course record, right? He breaks the course record, and he has a penalty, spends 3 minutes in the penalty box, and catches Thomas Hellriegel and, wins that race in his first time out. And then Chrissie Wellington, the same thing in 07, I think it was. Chrissie came over, and she wanted to make the Olympics. That was her goal. When she started working with Coach Brett Sutton, it was to make the Olympics. And Sutton saw something in her. He felt that she was more, her body was better for something like the Ironman. So she went and did Ironman Korea a few weeks before Kona to qualify for Kona. I think she even had a flat there, but she qualified for Kona. And so here she is. I think we were doing a live broadcast that day. Paul Huddle and I were doing a live broadcast. She's got no visor on, no sunglasses. She's smiling and kissing babies and running the marathon like it's no big deal. And we keep thinking, who is this woman? And watching her come out of absolutely nowhere to win 13 iron distance races, go undefeated in her career, that was pretty damn special. And then watching her come back so she wins in 7, 8, and 9. She doesn't start in 2010. And then in 2011, she crashes a couple weeks before the race and is really a mess. I mean, she's got open wounds. She's got sore ribs. And I think that she wouldn't even had gone to the starting line if she had been able to race the year before. But because she hadn't raced the year before, she's going to get to the starting line no matter what. And she came out of the water like over an hour. And I remember I was with her parents, and we drove out to Hawi, and they're used to seeing Chrissie winning this thing easily. Every year she won every year she won it by a bigger margin. So now she's 20 minutes back at Hawi to Julie Dibbins. And they're like, Bob, what's going on? What's happening? They were totally flummoxed. They'd never seen their daughter like behind before by that much. But we all knew that Julie Dibbins had a foot injury and probably wasn't going to run. So really, Chrissie was about 8 minutes down to the field. And she only had a couple-minute lead off of Mirinda Carfrae, now the defending champion. Mirinda had won in 2010 when Chrissie didn't go. And so you're thinking, okay, Chrissie is compromised and Mirinda has an opportunity to knock her off. Well, Chrissie held that 2-minute lead the entire marathon. And she was so gutsy. And when she finished that day, that was the last race she ever did. And she basically said, I was looking for that race that would take everything I had to win. I had that race, and I'm hanging it up. So who does that? They come into a sport, 2007 to 2011. They're in it for 5 years? They're in it for 5 years. They win 13 titles. They go 8:18 at Challenge Roth, 8:18 and 8:19. I think she ran like 2:44 or something at Challenge Roth. She breaks her own course record, well, at that point, the world record for long distance racing. That actually might still stand. I think it does still stand. And just changed everything and then was gone. And I know to this day that Rinny, that she thought she would have more chances to go after Chrissie and get her in 2012 or 2013. And I think Rinny had a hard time getting focused again when Chrissie retired. which I think led to her third place finish in 2012, and then she won in 13 and 14. But, we forget sometimes. I remember last year talking to Lionel and Sebastian. They were so upset that Jan wasn't racing. They work really hard to get to that starting line at Kona, and nobody celebrates when somebody else can't be there. Right, this year, Terenzo Bozzoni, who I thought was going to have a great race in Kona after finishing sixth a couple years ago, he had to pull out. And I know the guys were bummed for him. They wanted Terenzo to be on the starting line. And last year, Lionel and Sebastian, they didn't want to race without Jan being on the starting line. They wanted that best. They want to have their best day against the very best. And if you think back, when Mark Allen, after all his attempts, after 6 tries to win in Kona, and he had all those frustrations in the 80s where he flatted and he had internal bleeding, and Dave Scott ran away from him and passed him in 84 and 87. And then in 89, when he finally beat Dave went 18 minutes faster than he'd ever gone in his life. It was the greatest day that Dave Scott ever had, and Mark Allen beat him on that day. Sometimes things are just meant to be, and that was meant to be. It wasn't meant to be for Mark to win in 88 when Dave wasn't on the starting line because of a knee injury. It was meant to be that Mark did what it took in the offseason in 89 and then went to that starting line. And Dave Scott said in March when I interviewed him of that year, he goes, listen, to win this year, someone's going to need to run the low 240s. Remember, Dave Scott's course record for the marathon was 249 at that point. Someone is going to need to run the low 240s. There's only 2 of us who can do that. Mark Allen he sees that, and he knows who he's talking about. So Mark knew if he was going to win, he would need to run the low 240s, which he did. He ran 240. So it is pretty special times.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the amazing things about the sport is just seeing the camaraderie between the athletes, right? That they want to race the best of the best, right? It's not just getting to the top the easy way. That's one of the nice things about the sport. And I think all Ironman athletes, they want to put the time in, they want to put the effort in to prove to themselves that they can do something and not do it the easy way. So I think that's really fascinating and a good staple about the sport. And
absolutely.
Yeah, now I know you're well known for, of course, being an Ironman historian, but it's not just the Ironman you follow, as we can tell there. You just briefly touched on Challenge Roth, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Challenge Roth because, how would you describe this race compared to Ironman? Because, of course, it's not like the Ironman World Championships, but it's still a very popular and exciting race in its own unique ways, right?
I think if you were ranking the greatest triathlons in the planet, number 1 is Kona, Ironman World Championship, because of the history, because of the course. And number 2 is Challenge Roth. I mean, Challenge Roth used to be Ironman Germany. It was where Lothar Leder was the first guy to go under 8 hours. And the main thing with that race is you're swimming in a canal, and you've got these hot air balloons overhead. You've got symphony music playing. Then you get out of the water, and you're doing this 2-loop bike course, and you go up Solar Hill twice, and there's 50,000 people on that hill. There's 250,000 spectators. And what always amazes me, there's only 14 hotel rooms in Roth. There's no place for people to stay. People are camping out. People are staying in Nuremberg. People come there. It is Woodstock for triathlon. And you've got these huge crowds throughout the bike ride. Then in the run, they've got a beer mile where there's a mile of German folks drinking beer as you run through. And then the finish, I remember the first time I was there, there's this big grass plot, just this big, large area. And I'm like, wait, that's the finish? And they go, yeah. We start building the stadium on Tuesday of race week. They build a 10,000 person stadium that you finish in that week. And, in the winners, you've got the kids. The tradition is the kids with the balloons, the balloon kids. And Felix, whose dad started the event, started as a balloon kid. He ran with the balloons in front of the winners. And when he came back to run and to do the race in honor of his dad in 2014, all Jürgen Zach and Lothar Leder, all those guys, former champions, came back to run with balloons in front of Felix as he ran across the line. There's so much great history there and tradition, and it's a very, very special event.
Oh, 100%. I think you nailed it there. That's perfect. And I mean, it's funny when you talk about the finish line party essentially there, right? And you look back to what you had when you just crossed that white line and then the guy said, you're done. And your third Ironman, it's funny how the sport's come such a long way, eh?
It really is. And that's what makes the sport so great is it changes lives. You know, when people, I talk to race directors all the time, and a lot of times race directors are worried about the minutia of the day. They're like, oh, I hope I got my roads. I hope everything's good. And when they really need to be reinvigorated, they go to the finish line and watch people come across that finish line and watch their face light up and watch what it means to them. And if you think about it, when Ironman really took off, it was the ABC coverage of the 1982 Ironman where Julie Moss ended up crawling to get second place. And what was fascinating about it was that people were watching at home, and we'd had the show had been on ABC, Wide World of Sports, in 80 and 81. And yeah, you watch Dave Scott winning, but you're living in Minnesota and you watch Dave Scott win and he needs to go cool down after doing a 140-mile race. It's hard to relate to the guy. And then you see John Howard win in 81, and the guy's, three-time Olympian and Pan American Games gold medalist, and you're going, I can't really relate to this guy. Then you see this gal, Julie Moss, with freckles. She's 22 years old. She's got a trucker hat on. She's got a borrowed bra. She's crawling, and she's pooing herself. And you're watching at home going, this is stupid. This is unbelievable. I can't believe this is happening. What is it about that finish line that's so important that someone will lose bodily functions and crawl on the ground to get there and cross that line with a smile on her face? And how do I get some of that in my life? There's a feeling when you come across that line that's incomparable to anything else. And that Julie Moss moment, was the moment that took our sport to the next level, because people couldn't relate to these elite athletes winning. They could relate to somebody who could be your daughter, or could be your girlfriend, or could be your babysitter, crawling across this finish line, and because it meant so much to them.
That's right. No, that's excellent. It's an excellent way to show just the integrity and the abilities behind every athlete, right? Like the fact that we can push ourselves to that potential and have a goal set out and accomplish it. I think that's something that really strives for, and what attracts people to Ironman and triathlon these days, or any endurance sport for that matter. So that's a really cool story to kind of paint a good perspective on that. So excellent. And I mean, switching up a little bit here, because I was always curious to ask this, yourself having met so many athletes and very influential people within this triathlon community, and just getting to really connect with them on a personal level, does anyone stick out in your mind that you found really inspired you or influenced you over the years that has changed your path onto where it's at now, or helped you get where you are today?
Well, there was a lot. Obviously, Mike Plant with his magazine, and him telling me, hey, I like what you do, write more. Because I certainly didn't take journalism. I certainly wasn't a writer, I didn't think. And Mike recognized something in me before I recognized that. And that, Mike Plant, who was getting inducted in the USA Triathlon Hall of Fame this year, was someone who recognized that in me long before I did. And in terms of athletes, just becoming Mark Allen was a guy early on. Every time I tried to talk to Mark, I'd sort of stammer, just because I was just so in awe of the guy, and just knowing how hard he worked and how hard he trained. And Dave as well. Dave Scott and Mark Allen were two guys who were always so gracious with their time. I think they understood that we were all in this together, trying to grow this sport, trying to grow this industry. So when I launched Competitor Radio back in 1990, some of my first guests were Dave Scott and Mark Allen, because they understood that, listen, I'm here to try to grow this sport and grow awareness. If we're on a radio station where Wayne Gretzky and Joe Montana are being interviewed on a regular basis, and people hear an interview with Dave Scott and Mark Allen, they're going to think, wow, this sport is important. These athletes are important. And that hopefully will take this sport to another level. Another guy, Robin Williams, who became a huge supporter of our Challenged Athletes Foundation, Robin understood that his celebrity would bring people to our San Diego Triathlon Challenge event. And when people got there, they would see our athletes. And when they saw our athletes, they would be intrigued by them. And he understood that. He understood what his role was. And he understood that his celebrity could bring attention to the charity itself, which it certainly did. And so those are the type of folks who understood the big picture. They understood that there was the idea was to grow these sports and grow the awareness that these sports can change lives for the better.
Awesome. I see. I love that you mentioned that story, right? Because it's funny. I was just talking to Simon Whitfield earlier this week, and we're talking like he's the one who won the first gold medal for the Olympics, right? And he was saying, he's like, he can't believe that people still come up to him almost 20 years later and still reminisce on those like that year, that integral race that he competed in. And he just can't wrap his head around it. But I mean, he knows that and recognizes that. And he still goes out to local events in the area and just sprints in Olympic distances. And he's just going out there supporting athletes and new athletes and just keeping them inspired, right? And I think that's what's so amazing about the sport in general, because there's people like that are in the sport and they recognize the importance of it and just help spread the awareness of the sport and inspire people. So I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I love to race, and McKeely Jones is a kindred spirit. She loves to race as well, 2006 Ironman world champion and Olympic silver medalist. And McKeely and I will go out to these little pool triathlons on a regular basis, and she's just so gracious with her time. And you get these guys out there doing their first ever triathlon, and here's McKeely helping them set up their transition area, putting the towel out, and here's where you want to have your water bottle on your mountain bike that you're doing the triathlon on it. That's the thing, is our athletes, again, they didn't grow up thinking I am going to be a world-class athlete and I'm going to be compensated as a world-class athlete and I'm going to be above everyone else. I was an age grouper when I started. I became a professional, but damn, I'm going to be an age grouper forever. This is my sport. This is my life. That's actually one of the things that when pro athletes come back and race and age groupers are upset that they're in their division, I'm like, you know what? I don't want our athletes to go away. I want a Lisa Bentley or a McKeely Jones or a Dave Scott. We want those guys racing because it's basically our sport is the fountain of youth. You can do it forever. Why would we want our elite pros to go away and not participate in the greatest sport there is?
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. It's very well put. And so you mentioned there that you go out to the odd race every now and then. Now it's funny because I was going to be asking that if you're competing